meeting for September 17th, 2020. Shall we have a roll call of all the
Yes.
participants?
Commissioner Tencher,
Here.
Commissioner Riker,
Here.
Commissioner Means,
Here.
Vice Chair Shermaine,
Here.
and Chair Marciniak.
Here.
Thank you.
All right. Now we will do the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag for starting the meeting. We can.
I pledge allegiance,
Pledge allegiance to the flag of
United
the United
States,
States of America and to the
the
republic
for
for
which
which it stands, one nation, under
under
God,
God,
indivisible, for liberty and justice for all. Now, oops, got in there. Can we adopt the agenda? Are there any additions or corrections that would like to be made to the agenda? Not hearing that, will I have a motion to accept the agenda?
I'll make a motion that we accept the agenda for September 17th, 2020 as is.
Okay, and a second?
I second the motion.
A second. Thank you, Dave. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, we adopted the agenda. Now we go on to approval of the minutes from the last meeting of July. Are there any corrections, additions, or comments to be made to the minutes? I think Samantha, you did just a wonderful job in getting all that together. The only part I wanted to put in there was the motion to appoint to the foundation that Carol Sherming was not mentioned as the person being our representative from the board. So make that addition to the minutes. With that, anybody else have any additions or comments to put in? With that, I will have a motion to approve the minutes from July meeting.
I'll go ahead and make the motion that we approve the minutes from our last meeting.
And a second?
I second the motion as is.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. Okay. Now we'll, the next item is public comment that is not listed on the agenda. And this is limited to 5 minutes, and there is no action that will be taken because of this comment, but now we'll open it up for public comment.
Thank you. So I will read in one general public comment letter that was received today. It was not included in your packet previously, so this is a newer one. Dear Parks and Recreation Commissioners, we often say and have memorialized the idea into our town documents that parks are an important asset to our community. Yountville is blessed with many types and sizes of parks, as well as a very active Parks and Recreation department. Parks have played an important and ever-changing role in American urban life. The Boston Common, designated as a public open space in 1634, is considered the nation's first city park. Boston Common was purchased by its citizens and officially set aside as public or common land by a vote in 1640. From the mid to late 1800s, the urban park vision centered on providing natural settings in an urban environment. In the late 19th century, city governments purchased large tracts of land on the outskirts of cities to form pleasure grounds, semi-open, charmingly landscaped areas whose primary purpose was to allow city residents, especially the workers, to relax in nature. Beginning in the early 1900s, the vision for urban parks began to change. Demand arose from reform parks that provided recreation opportunities, particularly for children, in close-to-home neighborhood parks. U.S. cities built neighborhood parks with swimming pools, playgrounds, and civic buildings, with the stated intention of Americanizing the immigrant residents. Parks indeed serve as a social and socializing part of American life. The design, operation, and maintenance of parks is usually done by government agencies of the local area. Money comes almost exclusively in all towns and cities from general funds. Charging fees for use is most often done in state and federal parks rather than local community parks. The predecessors to urban parks in the United States were rural cemeteries. The cemeteries were intended as civic institutions designed for public use. Before the widespread development of public parks, the rural cemetery provided a place for the general public to enjoy outdoor recreation amidst art and sculpture previously available only to the wealthy. We stand to lose the original intention of parks in Yountville by charging fees for use. In the last few years, I have noticed a change in the demographics of people attending the park. No longer are many Latino families enjoying the lawn for picnics and soccer, populating the playground and using the park for impromptu music practice. Nor are their neighbors enjoying the ambiance of the park, other than in the early hours walking their dogs. What we see most often now are large parties and events with rented equipment and catering trucks and other organized parties. No more are the local residents just enjoying the park, their park. It is an insidious change that fees for use put into action. These fees are discriminatory on their face value and serve to eliminate the original impetus for creating parklands. Parks are of value to every aspect of Yountville life, from public health and social interaction to environmental aesthetic value, to community economic stability and overall community value. Parks are of value to every individual in town, whether they can afford the fee or not. Whether they can afford the fee or not determines whether they feel welcome to or can take advantage of its benefits. That was written and submitted by Pam Reeves on Jefferson Street. And that concludes the general public comment.
Thank you very much, Samantha, for reading that, and that is in the record. And I welcome any other comments that may come in. I have no idea if there's anybody else that wants to. And not seeing anything, I will close the public comment part of the agenda. The next item is the administrative item, and the first part of that is the report sharing the 5-year trends on park use and for discussion and feedback on potential changes to policies and procedures. So I think you had a report, Samantha?
Yes, just 1 second. Let me change my screen to get my notes open. Thank you. So tonight, before you, at your request, is an informational report showing data and statistics of the last 5 years of use of our park system in Yountville. And I just want to make sure that I'm clear that the data and information presented to you tonight are things that we can calculate. So we can calculate how many people come to a park reservation event, how many reservations we've had. We can calculate how many times we've had a city or town sponsored special event, and we can calculate how many non-town sponsored events. What we can't so accurately calculate are the drop-in users of our park system. So those are the people that just come to use the playground or set up a picnic or come just to visit for a few hours on an informal basis. And so those are things that are definitely more difficult to gauge. I mean, we do have a way of knowing when it's been very busy, you know, as far as us out there in the field, the amount of garbage use, the amount of restroom products we go through. But those are all kind of a cursory way of knowing that it's been a very busy weekend or week in the park, because we don't do a head count of everyone who comes in. So That being said, I do have a couple slides to go through with you, and it's really a compilation of the information that was provided in the staff report. And then I did add some additional information today based on some feedback that we were given. And I think it was good suggestions. So I should be sharing my screen now. Is everyone able to see that?
Yes, I am able.
Okay, perfect. So as we discussed the park use over the last 5 years, we do compile obviously park site reservations for the picnic sites. So just to refresh everyone's memory, we currently have 5 reservable picnic sites in our park system. And so there are 4 at Yountville Community Park and 1 at Veterans Memorial Park on the south end. And so as you go through this data, just keeping that in mind, it's not, we don't reserve space in our other smaller neighborhood parks. So as far as park site reservations, and as I said to you in the email as we went through, I was looking at some other data for residents and non-residents and realized that between 2015, 2016, 2017, we were reserving bocce courts singly. So every time someone rented a bocce court, we counted the individual bocce courts. And then in 2018, we started combining those into one reservation. So that's the numbers that I sent you earlier that changed were only based on the bocce court reservations, not the picnic site reservations. And so that's why these numbers from 2015, 2016, 2017 go up or go down so substantially in 2018 is just because if someone rented or reserved 4 bocce courts, it's 1 rental instead of the previous years where it would have looked like 4. And so this just gives you an idea of the total number of attendees. So when someone comes in and reserves a picnic site, we do ask the type of an event. We also ask how many people that they think will be attending. And so we use that data to calculate the number of attendees that's estimated. And then the total revenue. So we do charge what I consider to be a fairly nominal rate for residents. Currently it's $32, I believe, for the smaller sites and $50, $54 for the larger site. And then we charge the non-residents a premium fee as well. So this is the amount of revenue that comes in. I just want to point out that the revenue that we bring in for park reservations doesn't even cover the additional staffing needed during the high summer months for the Saturday and Sunday restroom and trash cleanup. So it's not necessarily a cost recovery model that we're in. So one of the questions that came up in a public comment, which I think was a valid one, were about who is reserving the park sites. And so, as you know, 2020, we have no data because we haven't been reserving anything, but I did want to just note that for future reference that, so that's why I included it with zeros, is that if someone's looking at this report, in the next, decade or something, they understand why there was a zeros there. But as you can see, I broke it up by residents and non-residents. So in 2019, Yountville Community Park had 117 picnic site reservations. 79 of those were residents and 38 were non. And then in 2018, it was 99, then 123, 90, 159. Veterans Memorial Park, as you know, only has the 1 reservable site, so it doesn't see as much activity as the other Yountville Community Park. So you can see here that the resident and non-resident comparisons there as well. And then also the bocce court reservations. So you can see here what I was describing as far as the individual reservations versus the bulk reservation numbers skewing. But then you can also see the resident versus non-resident use there. So it's actually closer to 50 to 60%. In some cases, some years it was even 70% resident use of those facilities over non. I did want to point out when we're talking about park reservations, so when I started here in 2010, we did have a park reservation system, but residents paid nothing and non-residents paid a nominal amount. And what we found was that people paying nothing would reserve the park site and then not come, or we just had a lot of kind of a failure rate as far as people reserving for nothing and then not showing up, which can be the case a lot of times when we don't pay anything for something. We find that with classes that are free and such. So we started out at $10, and that was 10 years ago. So residents paid $10. Now, as I described, we're up to $30. So I just wanted to give you some information on kind of how that started. So the reservation system has always been in place. It's just the fee that residents pay has changed over the years. So when we talk about special events in our parks, we really are talking about two parks, Yountville Community Park and Veterans Memorial Park. We don't currently have the ability to offer large events in any of our other parks because they are in neighborhoods and there's parking. There's mainly because there's parking limitations, obviously, that the other two community parks don't have. So again, here you'll see nothing obviously in 2020. In 2019, we had, and these, what I'm focusing on here are non-town special events. So these are people who are organizing through a nonprofit. So there has to be a nonprofit benefit element in it, to it. And so like an example is the Walk to End Alzheimer's is an event that happens in Yountville Community Park every year. And the Rock the Ride. So they all have to have some sort of nexus with a nonprofit. And so in 2019, there were 6 of those special events that are non-town sponsored in our parks. 4 were in Yountville Community Park and 2 were at the Veterans Memorial Park. In 2018, there were 3 events, all in Yountville Community Park. 2017, we had 3 events. Oops, that's a typo. It should be 2 in Yountville Community Park and 1 in Veterans Memorial Park. And then 2016 and 2017. Or excuse me, 2016 and 2015. And so as you can see, the number of attendees has increased. Again, this is a very nominal amount of revenue for those. The applicant does pay the park reservation. So we block out the entire park anytime there is an event going on. So we cannot reserve the picnic areas at that time. Again, last year that was 6 times during the year. And the minimum amount of revenue shown here is just from the special event permitting fees that are brought in. The revenue for the park sites is shown on the park sites. And so then really the biggest impact as far as number of people in our parks are our town special events. So these are the events planned by the Parks and Recreation Department that happen in our parks. So in 2019, there were 15 of those special events that were town sponsored. 6 of those are in Yountville Community Park. And those events are the Movies in the Park series. We do 4 of those on a Friday evening in June, July, August, and September. And then the Egg Hunt, and then Yountville Days. So 6 days a year. And then we also had 9 events in Veterans Memorial Park, and that was our Music in the Park series. So those are 9 Sundays. In 2018, it was slightly less. We've increased our music series amount every year since 2015. So that's really the difference that you're seeing is the Music in the Park. The 6 events that happen at Yountville Community Park have happened since 2015, where this data is, but actually in 2011 is when we started the 4 movie series, and then we've had the Egg Hunt forever, and Yountville Days really has gone on, I mean, for 30 plus years. So the total number of attendees has grown, mainly again due to the Music in the Park series, and that occurs at the Veterans Memorial Park. So the most of our impact for those 15 times a year is coming from the Music in the Park series at Veterans Park. So really what I thought, and these are just my suggested talking points for tonight, some of the concerns that had come up in the past that brought us forward here and having you look at this and asking to be put on the agenda is, do we need to look at limiting special events in our parks? Do we need to look at limiting picnic area reservations in the parks? Are there other issues or limitations that need to be discussed, such as amplified sound, I should say sound, capacity issues, activity limitations? So those are all things that we can talk about tonight. And really the process looks like, you know, if we discuss tonight that we want to move forward with some sort of administrative policy change or even a change to the municipal code, we most likely would bring that back to you as a future item to discuss what that language might look like before it moves forward to the town council for their consideration. So that's really how the process would look. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. The one thing that I'm just looking through my notes because I thought of something else that I think would have been relevant. So, you know, there's a discussion, and it'll come up in a public comment later, is that we're reserving the park sites so much that the general public isn't able to use them. So I went back and I just glimpsed at 2019. And in 2019, there were only 16 days out of the entire year where we had 3 or more of our park sites reserved. So 16 days where 3 or more of our park sites reservations were reserved. And I just wanted to point out as well is when someone comes and they reserve a park site, it's only for a 4-hour period of time, generally speaking. I mean, there's probably people that may stay a little longer, but they are reserving it for 4 hours. So it doesn't necessarily take it out of commission for the whole day. And of those 16 dates that I looked at, I mean, that was definitely the case. So I just wanted to put into perspective kind of how those use patterns work. And how that ties into to the fact that we can't technically count the number of people just dropping into our parks. And I think that you may be surprised at how prevalent that is. We are some of the highest use, especially Yountville Community Park, parks in the Napa Valley system. I mean, I think Fuller Park in Napa, and Kennedy Park in Napa, and obviously Alston Park in Napa, you know, those hiking parks, Westwood Hills are very highly used. But Yountville Community Park is fairly highly used, not just by residents of Yountville, but people from all around the valley. And like I said, we can't really calculate that. So they may come and show up on a first come, first served basis for their party of 30. And we're not able to really calculate that into the use. So, but what could appear to be a completely full rented out park on a weekend in reality is maybe 2 or 3 sites rented and the rest are being used by drop-in users. So I just wanted to kind of circle that in. But I am happy to answer any questions that you might have. And yes.
Just one question for you on can you clarify how many drop-in sites each park has? Because we don't have, if you could, we always have a drop-in space available, so it's not all reservable. So if you could just clarify that.
So on it, technically, so we have two areas at Yountville Community Park with just like standalone picnic tables that people can drop into. And then of course when you reserve a picnic site, you're only reserving those tables and the barbecue area. So the rest of the park is really open for people for their use. So they could come and have a picnic under, you know, the tree on the grass. Veterans Memorial Park has a lot more space. So when you reserve Veterans Memorial Park Site 5, it's only the area south of the bocce courts. And so there's a whole area on the north end of the bocce courts that's available for use. There's another 2 tables, full-size picnic tables near the plaza. And then, or the amphitheater, and then there's another 4 tables around the amphitheater. So there's quite a bit of space. And then of course all the lawn space and everything there as well. So I hope that answered that question.
Okay, are there any questions from the commissioners on this issue here?
We do have some public comment when you get to it, Paul.
Okay, I just have a couple questions here. You talk about the organized groups and the party, and then there's one part on the section 12.12.260 that says there's a area from over 50 users to 200 users. and the 200 users are the special event ones. Do we have any information on that group of from the 50 to 200?
So, oh, okay. So you're looking at the municipal code item 1212-260. So it reads organized groups are defined as sports teams, sports leagues, class groups, and any other group with more than 25 attendees, but less than 200. So that's just saying that we don't allow for those types of organized use without a permit. And what we can calculate is if a group of more than 25 people comes and they reserve a park site, then yes, we're able to calculate that into a reservation. And technically, per our municipal code, a group of 25 or more should not just be showing up to the park for an impromptu event, is how our municipal code is written.
So we don't have any information about what the size of the basic groups are except what they estimate. I'm just trying to get, because there's a big gap between the 25 and 200 where we don't know the size of the groups, and that affects the parking around the area. If you have 150 people showing up for an event versus 50 people.
Well, we do have a capacity if they're, like I said, if they're reserving a picnic site. And so each site has a capacity, and they do have to tell us on their application how many people they're estimating. So that all plays into, you know, how many sites that we have available for reservation and parking and all of those things that you discussed. If a group just showed up with 50 people to the park, that's not something, you know, we could collect, but it also, I wouldn't be able to calculate that because I wouldn't necessarily know, but it would be going against our current municipal code, which would define that as an organized group because it's more than 25 people.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I pretty much, you know, I know most of the usage for this is at the community park as versus the Veterans Park. And I kind of wonder about how the parking situation gets around. And I do get to the parking because we're trying to maximize parking for other issues. And yet, how do you accommodate these large special events with the parking situation? And I know because personally, you know, the parking comes into my, you know, in front of my house and on these events. So I know that when the events are.
So we do ask that they provide a parking plan. And so that's something that we analyze as well. And it is difficult though. So you give, I know because we specifically for Art Sip and Stroll internally, we bring in a lot of people, and I have to have a parking plan, and we reserve space at the Veterans Home, and we run shuttles and all kinds of things. And we don't even tell people that parking is an option in the middle of Yountville. We ask them to go up there, and people just don't. So it is difficult to manage. And so for those larger events, they do submit a parking plan. They do prove to us that they're showing their participants where they're supposed to be parking and shuttling. But it continues to be an impact to the neighborhood. Yes, we do understand that.
Okay, that's the only questions I have. Any other commissioners have any questions? So I'll open it up to the public to ask questions and make comments.
Well, I have public comment to read. So last meeting we allowed the public to speak, but that was because we had the issue with the public comment. So we don't have that issue. So technically, I just need to read into the record, just so you're aware.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. If someone does have a pertinent question, if you want to put it into the chat, I can raise that as well for the two people that are here. So are you ready for that? No other questions before we? Okay. All right, so in regards to item 7A, this is the first public comment. There are two. And then I'll double check the email when I'm done to make sure we didn't receive anything else. Dear Parks and Recreation Commissioners, I would like to comment on the staff report dated 9/17/20 from Samantha Holland on park use. First, I wish that each park's use were separated out so that we could see increase of use for the individual facility. And it is not clear whether the park under construction was Veterans Park or Yountville Community Park. Both were renovated not long ago. But generally, both non-resident and town-sponsored events have increased by 50% over the last 4 years. Reservations and attendee numbers have gone up 20% and 25% respectively. These attendee numbers are an estimate, and let's be honest, most people will underestimate in order to fit criteria or pay for the lesser reservation fee. If the trend continues, we are likely to see a close to 50% increase in those numbers as well between 2015 and 2023. It seems necessary to differentiate between parks in town. 1, Yonkville Community Park is located right across the street from many residents, single-family homes, and multi-unit apartments. It is a local park that has been used more like a municipal park because it was our only park for many years. Veterans Park is bordered by the highway, the main entrance street in town, and is across from a business. It is more of a municipal park location with opportunities for use not suitable for a park like Yountville Community Park. Yountville Community Park in such proximity to residences. Here, residences, including the mobile home parks, are set back and away from impacts and are behind the business of Washington Street. 3, Vineyard Park is tucked back in a residential area, and its use by non-residents mostly comes from word of mouth and invitation by surrounding residents. It is more of a neighborhood park. These parks and the activities afforded by each have completely different impacts on residents. What is an acceptable amount of noise and inconvenience to the residents who live around Yonkville Community Park? As we have seen, use numbers have increased and residents there are expressing concern over the quality of their environment over these increases. As use increases in the park where residents are impacted, the most recent example is in Vineyard Park and the pickleball soundproofing. Accommodations should be made to mitigate those impacts as best we can. While I have no problem with town-sponsored events in the parks, I do question the need to have non-town sponsored events in the park that has so many residences right across the street. It might be possible to transfer non-town sponsored events to the Veterans Park where there is less direct impact on residents. Having no non-town sponsored events at the community park would go a long way towards bringing the number of events in the park back to 2015 levels. It makes sense to continue to reserve the picnic spaces for residents to have parties and events, but that does not mean that all the areas need to be booked with non-residents as well. Let the non-residents use the areas on a first come, first served basis. This would eliminate many of the large catered events that dominate the park for everyone. Let the park go back to its original purpose, a community park. This doesn't mean that visitors cannot use the park, but it does mean that there will be more spontaneous, that the use will be more spontaneous and casual. Before someone accuses NIMBY for differentiating parks and activity levels, please remember that there was no resistance to spending $30,000 to mitigate noise issues at Vineyard Park. It makes sense that we all support making sure our experience living here is the best it can be. And to that end, I would suggest looking at eliminating non-resident bookings of Community Park and transferring non-town sponsored events to Veterans Park if the town feels it is desirable to support these events. Though I am less familiar with the booking of sports courts in town, I feel residents should always have preference and fees should be nominal, if at any, for that advantage. Residents can post their own reserve signs and staff need only provide the official sign or listing sheets. All of this can be more casual than it is now. Only the parameters of park etiquette need to be posted and enforcement provided if necessary. In closing, it is part of a healthy community life to have resident-focused events in community parks, just as it makes sense not to exploit neighborhood parks with overuse, and as it makes sense for the town to designate Veterans Park as its municipal park for uses that do not fit in other categories. We must be mindful of all residents' experiences and protect their right to a pleasant Yountville life. Sincerely, Pam Reeves, Jefferson Street. Okay, next one is from Lloyd Penrod. Dear Parks and Recreation Commissioners, regarding agenda item 7A. In the community park, we feel that more of the tables should not be reserved and rented, but should be kept available for locals on a first-come basis to keep it more of a community park. And perhaps more of the larger events could be held at the Veterans Park, which is surrounded by commercial buildings, as opposed to the community park, which abuts 15 residents in a neighborhood. Thank you for considering these suggestions. Lloyd Penrod and W. Wellborn, Lincoln Avenue. So those were both all provided to you in writing as well. And then I'll just double check that we have not received any other public comments, and we have not.
Okay, thank you, Samantha, for reading those. I appreciate those comments. Are there any other comments that the commissioners want to make in light of that? Steve?
Paul, I want a little more background that can offer you. The renovations at Yountville Community Park, when you look at especially the community-based events, Yountville Community Park has been the home for a number of years of community-based events, including Yountville Days, the school-related movies in the park, a variety of things. And in fact, if you may recall, Focus used to have a large event, the Focus Barbecue, and some other things. The renovation of the large gathering area was actually done to make those ADA accessible for all of our residents. Some of you may remember the gravel that people would sink into in wheelchairs and stuff. So the genesis actually was all community-based. The reason I share this is I think one of the questions that we need to be looking at is the community park and structures. So maybe we need to be looking at something like a limit on the number of events per month. Most of the events that we're talking about, you have the Alzheimer Walk, you have the Be Kind Walk. These are not large profit-making events. These are somewhat community-based. But I do think it's important for us to look at the consideration, and do we need to put one, group size capacity, and are people, are we pushing the envelope of what is the right size? So I definitely think that is something that is very worthy of consideration. And then we can put together a broader policy. But I do want to let people know that some of those community events have been held at Yountville Community Park for quite a number of years, and having no community events there might be a big policy change that would need to have some further evaluation. But we can certainly discuss that more.
Thank you, Steve. I have one comment to follow in on that. I know the town events, the Yountville Days Parade, the Easter egg hunt, the movies, they're all town sponsored and they're very good. We have other events, but what we're looking at is not a 12-month view of use of the park, but basically an 8-month use of the park, because you're not going to have the winter time much usage. So we do have to look at maybe limiting something about the usage of this, so it's not compressed into a shorter period of time, although they don't look like a lot, but you put that over 8 months as opposed to 12 months, it's a big difference in the amount of usage. So that's the only consideration I have. Thank you. Carol?
I just want to, in the letter, one of the letters, I think it was from Pam Reeves, but I think one thing we really got to keep in mind that when people have a family event that they're having, so say birthday party, which are very common, that families they reserve at Yountville Community Park. The reason that I think you just got to remember, they're choosing that because it has the beautiful playground park that's rented recently in the last few years done, and that's part of the draw. When you've got young children, they can go and use that as part of the entertainment. They're using that park there. They cannot do that at Vineyard Park. They cannot do that at the Veterans Park because that's not what the facility has. So I think in supporting how the reservations are going now, that we got to keep that in mind, because that's really, I think, what a lot of the young families, that's the reason that they're requesting to come. And they've got the picnic tables, the bathrooms, you know, there's the grass areas, we all know, but that playground area is very popular.
Great. Wendy? Yep.
I guess I'm just curious, if we eliminate or limit reservations, what would stop people from just showing up anyway? I'm just wondering if it would really change the dynamic. Like if we think somehow we're controlling it by having reservations, I almost think having reservations gives us a little more control, you know, and I don't know if there are insurance considerations, right? When they come and have an event, what happens if someone has that party and they get hurt, or, you know, so my fear is that, like, I hear what the neighbors are saying, but I just wonder, by eliminating reservations, it's if then you end up with people like showing up super early to mark their spot. I mean, if you're going to have a birthday party at Yountville Park, I don't know that it would keep you away if you couldn't reserve it anymore.
Well, I have to comment on this part. I don't think we're limiting the reservations for party use or family get-togethers or picnic table areas where you have certain areas where you can do for a small group. I think reservations help for the local people so they know they have this, rather than people showing up at 7 o'clock in the morning, dumping stuff on the picnic tables to reserve that so nobody else can use that. That's what we're trying to eliminate in that particular case. Reservation, it's more or less, how much do we charge? Are we trying to make this more profit orientated, or are we just trying to make it a community area?
Well, I think if you're going to have a party, though, and if you think about a kid's party, I'm just using that as an example there, the parents are going to want to reserve that, the families will, to ensure that they're not going to have the children's friends and family members showing up. And then now where do we go? We've got 15, 20 people, you know, where are you going to go ahead? If they can't have it in their own backyard, let's say. So the reservations, I mean, that's a good thing that they're doing that.
Yeah, I agree with the reservation part. It's just, how much do we charge? What kind of motivation do we do? You know, the priority is it for the community, the locals, or for any first come, first serve? So that is a huge question that we have to answer at some point.
Sam, do we know the rates that we charge comparison to the other Napa, like St. Helena, Calistoga, and Napa area?
So we're considerably less. So when you compare resident to resident fees, so we are considerably less than any of the other entities for their residents. The last time I looked, a resident fee space in like Fuller Park was well over $150, I want to say. Ours is under 40 for residents, and then non-resident fees, I can't recall. So we do, I mean, yeah, I think that we do tend to charge more market rate for non-residents than we do for residents. Receive a significant discount in Yountville.
And I will point out that if you look at the revenue chart, you know, we're looking at 14, 16, 15, 17,000. Revenue is not the significant motivating factor behind the fee structure that we have in place. It covers a nominal recovery of the staff effort, and most of it is designed so that priority is given to local residents, so they have access to the site for the reasons everybody's talked about. I would also echo Wendy and Paul, you're correct. I have seen prior to the reservation period when people would come out early, camp out, load everything up for the site. So that definitely did happen. Reservations, I mean, again, I think if we're concerned about it's what are you looking to address? What is the issue? If the issue is large events, then we should look at the number of large events. To your point, what is the appropriate capacity, sustainability, and should we look at limiting large events over a duration? And then that becomes a policy guidance, and then you can come back and look at, well, which ones get put in the queue, and basically then we'd be saying no to anything else that location. And that's the type of thing that I think if you're really looking at trying to address, because we do not have a lot of corporate use of the park. Statistically, that just does not bear out. We have a lot of small group parties, families, quinceañeras. They look different now, but we still have a lot of those birthday parties and social gatherings that are by far the largest amount of park rentals. And as you saw statistically, they've been consistently used by residents the majority of the time.
Alan, you had a question?
Yeah, several things. First of all, Samantha, thank you for putting together such a thorough and data-driven summary of park activity. So thank you for that. Second of all, I want to echo what Steve says. It seems like we're dealing with several issues, and I'd like to take them one at a time and deal with them and be done with them. The issue that seems to be missing a little bit to me, well, there's two. One's a comment, but before that, Steve asked a little bit early on, and I'm a little unclear in each of the major parks, Veterans Park and Yountville Community Park, how many places are reserved only and how many are available for people just to drop in? Because one of my thoughts is that a lot of people just drop in. They come up from Napa. Some of them are Yountville residents that drop in, but here's my comment is that the demographics of town are changing so dramatically, and we see this in what people are looking for in their Yountville experience. The Veterans Bash, people love to join a party. People used to throw their own parties, but now we're a town, I think, that likes to join parties, and Parks and Rec has done a marvelous job in creating things like the movies in the park and stuff like that people seem to like to join into. So anyway, Samantha, if you can clarify sort of how much is reserved and how much is open in both of those parks, it would help me a lot.
Yeah, for sure. So at Yountville Community Park, we have 4 reservable areas. So the one next to the playground structure, Site 2, which is under the Redwood Grove. You got it in there.
Yeah, and it shows it on the packet.
Okay. I'll just cover what is reservable, and then I'll cover what is open for drop-in use.
Sure.
And then we have the 2 sites at the south end of the park in that large event space. That's actually 2 sites down there, rented. They can be rented together for larger events, but separately they hold 75.
Right.
And so left at that park, so like I described to you, there was only 16 total days last year where in 2019 where we had 3 or more rentals at that park. So so if, let's just say it was one of those days where we had all 4 sites rented, there's going to still be 2 picnic tables at the south end of the park that are open for drop-in use. And then there's 1 more up by the playground. And then of course, all of the grass area is available too. When you reserve a park space, you're only getting the tables and the barbecue and that footprint. You're not, it doesn't mean the park is closed to the public. So the public can come in and out and enjoy that space. Even during, this isn't answering your specific question, but even during events there. So if someone is having a one of those fundraiser type events in the park is still open to the general public. They cannot close the park to the general public. So I just want to make sure that's clear. At Veterans Park, there's a lot more drop-in space. The only reservable site, Site 5, is at the very south end of the park, adjacent to the dirt lot there. So at the south end of the bocce courts. And so technically speaking, there's 4 picnic tables at the north end of the bocce courts that are always available unless bocce club is going on. And then there's 2 more full-size picnic tables near the plaza area. And then there's 4 additional smaller size tables around that plaza. And then as well as all of the open grass space. And the same thing I stated before is true there, so.
Okay. And then with respect to the 16 total days where, you know, everything was reserved, and that refers specifically to Yountville Community Park, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And it was either 3 or 4. So I think when I looked, there was maybe 6 days, and it was 6 days with 4-hour slots of time where all 4 sites were booked. And we never book back to back. So we had never have one formal reserved space and then another one come in later in the day. So they can only have 1 reserved use a day at each site.
Okay. So it seems one of the things that was brought up is whether being more spontaneous and less reservation based, you know, might create a different vibe and be more bucolic, for lack of a better word. I kind of think I'm hearing from some of the others, at least, and then my personal opinion is pandemonium is never something that I look forward to. So I like the reservations, that a table is often open or available. It seems would allow for people to spontaneously show up. So I think the reservation idea, if that's one of the things we're dealing with, is solid, and the pricing and preference to Yonkville residents seems reasonable to me too.
Thank you, Alan. Any other comments on this? I think we probably have 2 issues. The small group party reservation and the large special events that we have at the park. Those are 2 separate issues there, and I agree with that. I think everybody would like to see the use of the small groups continue with the use. I think it's more or less, to me, that my impression is the larger special events, we have a number of town-sponsored events, and then other events. How much do we use the park for those in a combined method on this? Am I correct in that thought process?
That's the way it seems to me.
So aren't the 2 that we mentioned that are the large ones are the Rock the Ride and the Alzheimer's? Those are the only 2, is that right, Samantha? Were the really large ones that were not town sponsored?
So those are 2 of them.
The Be Kind Walk would be another one.
Okay.
That's at Veterans Park. The Be Kind
Alzheimer's.
Walk. The Alzheimer's Walk we discussed, the Rock the Ride, and then we had a smaller Crush Cancer ride that was about 150 people. last year.
Also, one of the larger activities is a Thomas Keller restaurant group
That's
where they rent the park for their employee appreciation event.
yeah. And we do have them go through the special event permitting process for that because of the size. So those are the ones that occur that are non-town sponsored currently. And just so you know, when we do get requests for those non-town events, they are very closely scrutinized for fit, but unfortunately, you know, the Alzheimer's Walk is one where I think they're probably this year would have been, I think, 6 years in Yountville, and that event has seen some growth, and we actually were discussing its fit before moving into this year, which obviously they didn't have an in-person event, but looking at alternate sites for that. So we do closely scrutinize, you know, those events, but again, you know, it was mentioned before, we only know what we know, and if people don't accurately record their estimated attendance, or their estimated attendance is low and they get a big crowd, we won't know until it happens, unfortunately, and then we can react for future years. But, you know, it's something we talk about a lot in parks, with public works, is those kind of drop-in passive use areas. And so we do, just so you know, we do try to keep that at the forefront when we're discussing, you know, moving things around in parks, or, you know, improving areas of the park. We do talk a lot about that. We don't talk at this point about adding anything that's for reservation. And we really haven't added any reservation areas in the last 10 years. Even with the renovation projects at both parks, we did not add any fee-based reservation areas. We only added passive drop-in use areas. So the south end of Yountville Community Park was one site forever, and then we split it into two because it made more sense, because it's such a large area. But as far as you know, increasing any of those reservation areas, we have not invested in that and don't plan to. We've really put forth money in the project planning towards improving the passive and drop-in use areas. So I just wanted to include
And
that.
actually, Sam, to amplify what you're talking about, we've actually even had some preliminary discussions about adding another drop-in site at Yountville Community Park. So that, if that is something that the commission wanted us to perhaps look at, you know, a small additional site with another picnic table, that's certainly something that we could put forward into our work plan for next year as well. So, I mean, that might be a thought, if that is a concern that there is not adequate drop-in.
Could, at Vineyard Park, was it possible that they could add a couple more picnic tables there for drop-ins, or not necessarily reservations, but as far as spreading out, thinking locals, if they would like to go out and do, you know, spontaneous get together, and if it's busy, the other parks, is that anything that's been looked at?
Yeah, I think we can definitely, you know, talk about that. I think there's space out there. We do have more passive seated benches than picnic tables in that park, but yeah, it really would be something for locals. We don't promote that park
Right.
as somewhere as a destination, because there's no parking, and
It's part of our 5-year CIP includes an additional
The
park
backside.
picnic area on the backside already. So we're working on that now.
Okay, I was thinking more so on the, let's see, towards Holly, I guess, is that the street, that in the area? Because I know recently they've done some lawn work, or maybe tearing,
There is
redoing
room there
something.
to add a second picnic table. There is one picnic table and 2 benches there now. So we haven't received a lot of requests for that, but I mean, those are nominal cost, you know, as Joe and Sam both mentioned, and you guys are aware, you have worked on a plan that will add a more formal vineyard view picnic area location that will probably be, you know, one of the Cadillac spots in that park. I have seen, and as I live in that neighborhood, and certainly We've seen increased utilization of Vineyard Park during the COVID-19 experience, which on some levels is positive to see. But again, if there's a concern that we're not meeting local drop-in picnic need, there are some really lower cost. I mean, buying the appropriate picnic table and adding the space is nominal.
Yeah, I think because you've got the water and the restrooms that are there, you know, you feel that, and there's that, maybe playing basketball or something, it's because it's there. That might be take off some of the burden over at Yountville Community Park that the residents are concerned about. Just throwing it out there.
I think what you mentioned earlier, in just something to maybe preface the conversation a little, is that, you know, we have, although we have the Tot Lot and we have Forester Park, residents know about those, but not a lot of non-residents know about those, which is good, right? They tend to go to Yountville Community Park. They tend to want to reserve Yountville Community Park picnic sites, and what you said, Carol, was exactly why, is the playground structure, and that we have restrooms, which is not something you get in a lot of area parks. And so, you know, the other thing I was thinking is, well, we could, you know, cap the number of reservations that we do. So maybe we only have 2 sites rented on any one day. But I think what problem that you'll run into is then we'll see an increase in the number of people that just show up at 7 a.m. and lay all their stuff out, and sit there for the day until their 4 o'clock party. And so I don't think that's necessarily what we're going for either.
Yeah.
Because it is such a high use park. I think that definitely needs to be taken into consideration, and just knowing, you know, I spent a whole lot of time in Yountville, and I mean, my son's 12 now, but from 2 to 12, we were in those parks on a constant basis. And I can tell you, knowing, you know, internally what is a reservation and what's not, a lot of the impacts that you're seeing at that park on the weekends are people just coming to enjoy it. It's not necessarily the number of reservations. It's just the sheer amount of people. And we're starting to see that in Veterans Park too. And I think, Alan, you said that, is that when people, you know, I'm seeing a lot of tourism groups that have Veterans Park as a destination. You know, they come do their thing, they pick up their box lunch, and they go down to the park, and it's, you know, a girls' trip of 10, or, you know, I'm seeing a lot of groups that have that as a destination for them. But, you know, we those aren't the reasons we make the decisions we make, you know, and I say that a lot when people talk about parks and recreation in town, and, you know, well, are you doing it for the residents or for the visitors? And every decision that we make in Parks and Recreation is for our residents first and foremost. But that doesn't mean that visitors don't come and enjoy it or sign up for it, or non-residents. We have a lot of non-residents from other areas in the county that enjoy a lot of what we do in Parks and Rec, but it's not why we make the decisions that we make. And we were developing those parks, or redeveloping them. A lot of you were on the commission at that time and know that those aren't the reasons why we made the decisions for those parks either. So it really was about our internal needs and events in Yountville. So.
Okay.
I feel like I've heard a little bit that the reservation system, that we're still leaning towards that being a good model for the parks, because it does lend us more control. And I think, honestly, my fear is that we would run into an issue with large groups coming and showing up, although they're not supposed to, and then having not a lot of recourse. That's what makes me a little nervous about that. So
I think that's our biggest concern, is a large groups showing up or scheduling events and just overrunning everything else in there. And if they start doing that on a more frequent basis, then it's going to be a bigger problem. I think my opinion is we need to look at how we're going to deal with large groups a little bit more significantly, whether limiting special events to a certain amount per year, and that's it, or just trying to, I hate to say this, police it a little better, that we don't have all these large groups just showing up. So I'm not quite sure of how we're going to do that, but I would like to see if we can kind of work towards a goal of achieving that.
So if we're saying that, and correct me if I've misheard something, but it seems like there's this sense from the residents that are near the park that they definitely feel the impact of the heavy use of the park. And that is felt not just on special event days, but in the regular weekend time. Would you agree that that's what we're kind of hearing?
I would say yes. We do see a significant usage on the weekends. It's a lot of weekends, and understandably, there's a lot of usage there.
Right.
It's a desirable place. So.
Right. So, you know, it's kind of well. So if it's so attractive, maybe we make it less attractive. Maybe everything is by reservation, and there's less spaces. If that's the problem, if the problem is that there's too much use at the park, then one of the options would be to decrease the intensity of the facilities at that park. So is that something worth considering, or are we happy with the
possible question for you? I'm hearing a little bit of confusion. For me anyway, it's creating confusion. Are we talking about the known large special events? And Paul, you mentioned these larger groups that just show up. Those larger groups that just show up, they're not accounted for in any of our stuff. So we're not going to be able to manage that. So the real question for me is, I think these are appropriate policy considerations for the commission to wrestle with, is do you want to limit the number of town events? Okay, as Sam had identified, there were approximately six at Yountville Community Park, 7 at Yountville Community Park, and 6 8.
Oh, I'm sorry, at Veterans Park.
And then I was going to say, and then you have the non-town events like the Rock the Ride, the Alzheimer. So the question there, and again, and it may take a couple meetings for you to delve in, but one of the things could be, let's look at a size capacity. Maybe some of these, and these are conversations that Sam and I have had, because as we look at things like Rock the Ride, especially when we had the event, right after the Veterans Home shooting, there was a large, community-based response to that. But maybe that's too much for the park. So the question would be, first, I think 2 considerations. One, capacity. So what is the carrying capacity size? And then, is there a limit? Or do you simply say, make a recommendation to the council, no non-town sponsored? Because then you run the argument that somebody will try to get a town co-sponsor. But I mean, or is there a range of 1 a month? And I agree with you, Paul, it's probably 1 a month during that 8-month period, and see where that goes. Or is it 4? I mean, those are the types of things that I think we're talking about, or at least is what I'm hearing from one of the, some of the public comment in terms of how I sense they're looking at that. And of course, that's going to have a different level of conversation, because some of those, I don't know, that's just maybe a starting point to help you.
And I think that's a very feasible starting point. And I feel that although, yes, there is a benefit to those nonprofit events, I think, if we were to say, unfortunately, if you want to stay in Yountville, you're going to have to move to the South End Park. I don't think that is necessarily going to be a huge issue. We did have we had a lot more events that used to come through town and come through our permitting process when the veterans home allowed them to be on their campus. And so 2 years ago, the veterans home stopped that. And so a lot of those very large scale bike events now move to Napa, to Justin Sienna or other sites. Because when they approached the town, we said, I'm sorry, there's absolutely no way we can accommodate your event of that size. So I think that when I think about the events, that use Yountville Park, could they be adapted to Veterans Park, the non-town sponsored events? I believe they absolutely could.
Yeah.
And I think that, I think about the town sponsored events in Yountville Community Park, there would be April, there would be June, July, August, September, there would be one a month, and then there would be October, which would be Yountville Days. So that would be, one a month for a six month period of time. And I don't necessarily, like I said, feel that any of the events that I'm thinking of necessarily, would balk at having to move. Would they love it? Probably not. But I think that if that's the option that they're given, then it is the option. So.
Well, I do think we need to see about addressing that specific issue about that. I think our first priority should be the town events. I mean, those should have first priority to the use of the park. And then after that, a special event, whether it's size and impact on the community, the area, fits with what we want to use with that, or have it go to the south side or somewhere else. I think we need to kind of look at that issue, if that's what I'm hearing from everybody else, Steve and you, Samantha. So.
Yeah, it could be that, or we could, if it's once a month, then we could see if events of a size limit that we state, can fit within that. So I think there's still options if that's what you chose to pursue. I think that, Wendy, sorry. Oh.
Go ahead, Wendy. You have a comment?
I'm good. I'm just kind of thinking it, mulling it all over.
It's a big issue. I agree with everybody. And I think if we narrow the scope to the special event issue and maybe look at that next time,
okay.
We might have a better grasp of what we want to pursue on this.
Okay.
Samantha, I
Yes.
was thinking in a normal time period with pre-COVID, we'd be busy though, obviously the reservations, but normally what is the time frame as far as if somebody wants to make a reservation months in advance? Mm-hmm. What is a policy that you've got for that? Is it like 6 months? Is that too early for folks?
We take reservations for park sites a year out.
Okay.
And then if for special events, they have to apply at least 90 days in advance,
Okay.
but can also apply up to a year in advance. So, but what I can do is, it sounds like maybe we're leaning towards bringing back the issue of the special events specifically, where we can look at, and I can, I can provide a little more information on the ones that are existing now and when they fell, and the specific impacts of each, as far as how many people, and then consider maybe drafting some changes to that if that's the outcome at that meeting. So it's September, so we wouldn't meet again until November. But as you know, nothing is going on right now. So we just reopened our playgrounds. And so hopefully we'll see a little bit of a return for visitors to our parks, and kids coming, which would be amazing. But we're obviously not doing any reservations. We're not having any events. So as far as timing, I think this is a good time for us to be examining this and spending quality time getting feedback from the community, and for you all to mull it over and think it through as well. I don't think we have to rush towards the finish line on this right now.
I think that makes sense, Sam, and you and I can put together some policy bullet points for the commission to look at with regards, and then maybe collectively put a package together that they think makes sense. And you know, have a broader community discussion and take to the council.
That would be very good. I appreciate that.
Perfect.
Does everyone feel comfortable with that?
Yes.
Commissioners?
Yes.
Yes, I just want
Very
to
much.
reiterate, Steve, I think I understood your points. I just want to make sure that people that live near the parks aren't feeling pressure just from the general use of the parks, let alone big events or, you know, sponsored, either town sponsored or not. Do any of the commission or staff feel that the intensity of use of the park, just with the number of picnic tables, play areas, and stuff like that, is creating a negative experience for the residents? Or are we simply hearing that the concern is the large events?
I feel that from the public comment that we've received to this point, that the majority of the concern and impacts are around those larger events, and then a concern that there are areas in the park that are open for people to just come and enjoy when they choose, and not have to pay and not have to reserve, but to come and just enjoy it. And so I think that's really the two main things that we're hearing. And we can continue, obviously, to engage the neighbors in the area there as we move this forward in November.
And also the broader community, because there may be some other community feedback as to some of these events and the values. So I think what we're trying to say here, and that's why I'm going to come back to capacity and frequency, those make a lot of sense, because then we have something to manage to and address, so that we aren't creating something that is too large. And potentially those events then have a choice. If they're able to, they want to continue, as Sam said, then they have to agree to comply by our rules for the use of the park. And then if not, I think, you know, I'm going to suggest we'll come back with some similar concepts for Veterans Memorial Park, so that we don't create another problem inadvertently. Because I remember 14 years ago, my first volunteering with the Focus Barbecue. I'm helping people, and I think it was Eric Knight and such, and the truck is rolling up, and this was before we have the nice plaza area at the Veterans Memorial Park, but things were being put in, and it was just, you know, overtaxing that site, and that was led to a lot of the community discussion about, well, maybe this should move to the community park. And that was, again, so it's, I think the takeaway here is, yes, we're hearing, there may be other points of view as well that we need to factor, but I definitely think looking at a policy on the frequency of events and the impact on size, we can certainly look at whether there's the ability to add another drop-in, write up a little summary on the reservation policy. The fee structure, I will echo, again, it's $17,000 a year. We're not, and that's something to keep it low. So I think we've got a good starting point, and then we'll have that for you to have a broader conversation on at your next commission meeting.
That sounds good.
Okay, thank you. I think that does bring this issue. We're making progress on that, and bringing forth some solution that we can work on and bring to the council for that. So
The other thing, I'll just, more of a broader sense that we are, and I don't know if this is a COVID-19 issue, but we have a love-hate relationship with our dogs. And in fact, I'm sitting here in this meeting with my dog sitting underneath me, and I apologize if any of you have heard her. She gets a little, but we are seeing some increased communication and frustration about people not following the leash laws at all of our parks. I just want to say this is not a specific park. This is just a general, because as more people are out using the parks, that includes walking and taking the dogs, and some of the dogs being off leash. So it may be something that we need to come back and revisit as well. But I just want to acknowledge that we're getting some phone calls and concerns about that but it's at all of the Vineyard, Veterans, Yountville Community Park. I can't say that we've heard any concern about Forest or the Tot Lot.
Okay, I think we need to go on to the next item on our agenda. It's the park's restroom discussion about an automatic lock system at night for the park. And I think that may be Joe that you've got a report on that.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My pleasure tonight to bring forward for you for discussion. A discussion about the park's restrooms. So there are 3 parks in the town of Yountville with restrooms: Yountville Community Park, Vineyard Park, and Veterans Memorial Park. And 1 restroom here at Town Hall that's open as well, right in front. They're all open 24/7. The current policy is that all parks have restrooms that are open to the public with no closures. It should be noted that our parks by municipal code are open from sunrise to sunset. And while the parks are closed for public use during those hours, it is beneficial and I'm sure much appreciated to those occasional drivers, walkers, runners that still benefit from the use of the restrooms that are open if they are needed. In discussion with other agencies in the nearby area, it's a mixed bag for closed versus open restrooms. St. Helena, for one example, has the majority of theirs open, with one being the one main one in the park is closed with an automatic lock. They share that code with the NVTA bus drivers so that those restrooms are available to those drivers when they are needed. Napa closes the restrooms and has for some time. They have an elaborate system for access, and they also have somebody who is an overtime employee that opens and closes the restrooms. The staff concern for closing the restrooms is that, and this is based on our experience in a variety of park systems and in a variety of agencies, and it's across our staff, both operational staff and admin staff here in Public Works. You close the restrooms, that those who need the restroom will find a way to relieve themselves with or without the facilities. And it's certainly our experience at Public Works that we have had to deal with the end result of that reality. Restroom closures have also led to vandalism, of course, the cleanup and reports to law enforcement in some cases. In the case of the other agencies and staff experience, most of the closures in those cities and towns are driven by the need to reduce the access to the facilities by homeless or other similar uses that resulted in some unsavory behaviors and actions. And of course, in some cases, it has led to vandalism and misuse of the restrooms. As you might imagine, it should be noted that neither town staff or our sheriffs have had many, if any, issues with the restrooms after hours. Staff has been performing informal after dark surveys. It's been around 6 to 8 vehicles that are in the area. Most of those are parked at the cemetery end of the park. They're part of a parking management plan, and that's where they're directed to park. There have been some questions and comments about similar locks that were in place about a decade ago and why they were removed. And it seems like there was some issues with the operations, and in some cases, or in a couple of memorable cases, some patrons and one of the staff members got locked inside. So that's why they were removed. It seemed to be a concern for other local agencies when I discussed it with them as well. And with one commenting, I believe it was Napa, that said they had a similar experience with lock failure. We're reasonably sure that the newer technology is available. That's less likely and shouldn't be an issue. The electronic locks that we've been looking at, based on conversations with our neighbors and other agencies, about $1,700 each. So that would put and that includes some of the software and most, but not all of it. And we have 6 restrooms, so that'd be about $10,000, not including the install time, which would be minimal. This would give us an opportunity, we think, to have some remote operations, setting lock timing, that kind of thing. We think that if the committee makes a consideration of closing the restrooms, that they would also consider leaving at least one open without restrictions, and maybe a Veterans Park would lend itself to that more readily than the other parks, just because of its location and access to the curb and parking and that kind of thing. So in conclusion, the current policy allows for all restrooms to be open without a restriction. There haven't been many, if any, reports of vandalism or criminal activity associated with the restrooms in the recent past. Allowing the restrooms allows access for those who need the facility to use it. The majority of the restrooms at nearby agencies lock their restrooms to lessen the homeless, the vandalism, and other crimes that happen. And installing the new locking system would be about 10 grand. It's not currently budgeted, but we recommend leaving at least one restroom open at Vineyards Park if you're going to consider locking the restroom. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions that you might have.
Joe, I think you mean Veterans Memorial Park?
Veterans Memorial Park, sorry. Yes, thank you, Steve. I misspoke.
Are there any questions from any of the commissioners in here? Alan?
Joe, do you have any sense, for example, at Vineyard Park, I can't imagine there's a lot of activity there after dark, but the other parks, Veterans Park, right off the freeway, I mean, I would assume that's got some use, but do you have any sense of what the pressure is?
I don't really, committee member Tencher. I would just say that based on the surveys that we've done, there's just a few cars, so it might be, it's few if any, but I don't live near the park, and it's not, I'm not the one who's, there's been one or two people who have asked for this, and that's why we're discussing it tonight. Not a lot of use, I would say. I would say that the people who have their cars parked at the north end of the park that are restaurant employees probably use those facilities if they can at the restaurant before they leave. I can't speak to it with any real educated opinion. I'm sorry.
No problem. I was just curious to understand whether it's a, heavy issue or not so much.
Yeah, just based on the surveys, and I've been the one driving around because I live here in town, so I've been doing the surveys somewhere between 8 and 10, 4 or 5 nights a week, and there's been between 6 and 8 cars. Like I said, most of those parked at the far north end of the park. I would suspect that there's few, if any, use of those restrooms, but like I said, I don't live around the park, and those couple of residents that have voiced concern live much closer than me.
What I would say is that we probably, most of our parks are much more used 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. So if we looked at something maybe seasonally adjusted to 10 at, but I think, it's certainly something that we can put together. I do echo the idea that perhaps, especially if we look at limo drivers, Uber drivers, and some of those, and being able to market a restroom that could be available and we monitor it. But if the concern is that, and
our shuttle driver, we would need something for the shuttle driver to be able to use a restroom too.
So that would support keeping, and it probably makes sense to keep, as Public Works Director mentioned, focused on Veterans Memorial Park at this point. So, I mean, it's certainly something that if you all wanted to support the policy, then we can look at going to the council for the funding authorization.
Dave, go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Paul. So I guess my input was fairly minimal, but would there be signage then to direct people who are at the Veterans there or Vineyard Park? I think it's very minimal at all, but
that's
telling where to go. It's possible to go use a restroom at.
That's what we would that's what we would do. Of course. Yeah. We would try to communicate it in as many ways as we could.
I just have another question. I'm assuming that these locks are programmable, so we can set them to be on at any time and open up at any time individually, each one be programmed. So You know, and my feeling is a person who's going to use the restroom doesn't just park their car there for a long period of time. It's a short period of time that they're going to drive into town or go there, use the restroom, and leave. So it could be any time in the middle of the night. Um, so I appreciate the fact of the town willing to put in a policy and invest in the money to set up a programmable thing so we really have a better handle on just what the usage is in the middle of the night, because nobody's out there watching it. We don't have video cameras out there watching it all the time. So we really don't know, except for the word we get from neighbors and people about traffic going by. So I know it's an investment, but we also need to think about, you know, the restrooms are very clean, and if we can keep those restrooms very clean for the day use, I think that's important for our both residents and park users. So.
Yeah, we clean them every morning regardless, so it hasn't been a problem to this point, Chair Marciniak.
So do we want to pursue this to have the locks put in for the parks?
If I could, Chair Marciniak, I think the recommendation here would be to recommend a change in the policy to implement the locking system and to recommend that the council fund. And I'm going to say, you know, we may need to add one more, because did we account, Joe, for the anticipated increase in the new restroom from the grant? But nonetheless,
we can add that when we do the grant.
If that's the direction, then we will go back, because very similar to the other request, this will also need a recommendation, and it could be one of two things. That the recommendation will need a budget amendment, as we're in the middle of the fiscal year as well, for the council's consideration.
Okay. Well, thank you, Steve, for clarifying that. I did mean the recommendation on that.
I understand. That's why our job's to try to help what you can and the ideas. So.
Okay. Do we want to pursue this, Dave?
Thank you for recognizing me. Just a question for Samantha. I mean, we did receive two public comments regarding this. I don't know if it needs to be read into the minutes or not.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you so much, Dave. Yes. So under item 7B, we have two public comments. So the first one, dear Parks and Recreation Commissioners, I would like to comment on the staff report submitted by Joe Tagliabashi for your meeting on 9/17/20. I will start by agreeing with the last line of the report that the town should provide one open restroom in town, that one should be in town, and that one should be at Veterans Memorial Park. This restroom is conveniently right along Washington Street, and the park itself does not front any residences, thus eliminating impacts on residents. I will say that it is nice that we experience very little vandalism to our facilities, but I do not think that is a result of offering a passerby restroom facilities. If we provide signs and directions to an open restroom, that will take care of those in need. Vandals will do what they do, whether the restroom is open or not. In order to protect the peace and quiet of the residential nature of both Vineyard Park and the community park, those restrooms should be closed when the parks are closed. Use of the new remote programmable locks would provide a good solution to this issue. I have to say that most people would not expect a park restroom to be open 24/7, and closing them when the park is supposed to be closed would go a long way towards making the parks feel more safe to the residents. This is a relatively easy fix for a problem that has evolved over time. Park restrooms were always closed at dusk when they were first provided. It is time to go back to that standard and protect residents from unneeded intrusion of light, noise, and traffic at all hours of the night. and that was submitted by Pam Reeves of Jefferson Street. The second one, dear Parks and Recreation Commissioners, we have lived on Lincoln Street across from the community park for 30 years and have noticed ever increasing usage, which has accelerated over the past 5 years. One of the many impacts to residents is from the late night activity generated by the recently added lighting and keeping restrooms open 24 hours a day where they abut our residential areas. Picture loud conversations, equally loud music, car doors slamming, and the occasional car alarm well after midnight. We understand the efforts to encourage restaurant workers to park near the graveyard and away from the residents throughout town. They have access to restrooms before they leave work. Limo drivers can be redirected to different facilities with signage. The restroom and street parking on Lincoln Street sits across from 15 residences and should be locked at an earlier time, perhaps sunset at closing time of the park. If a 24-hour restroom is felt to be needed, the one at Veterans Park makes better sense. It has easy highway access and is surrounded by commercial businesses. Signage could be added to the other parks to direct after-hours users there. As for the cost of the locks, thousands of Airbnb hosts use affordable remote-controlled locks without trapping their guests inside their houses. The pickleball noise issue was not budgeted and quickly got a $30,000 fix. Compared to this, the $10,000 expense, which seems very high, sounds like a bargain for taking care of 3 park restrooms, community and Veterans Park, which should be closed for park hours, or should be closed after park hours. With regards to safety issues and vandalism, the lighting late at night draws people to the area as if it's open for business. Locking these restrooms at night and dimming the light or putting them on timers as well seems like an easy solution to improve the quality of life for residents adjacent to the park. As neighbors and fellow residents, we hope that you consider this item as if you lived right across the street from this restroom, and it was your hope that those in charge would hear your valid plea for assistance on this matter. Sincerely, Lloyd Penrod and Debbie Wellborn of Lincoln Avenue. And I just double checked, and we have not received any other public comment, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. Are there any other comments to be made from the commissioners here on this? Do we want to recommend that the council pursue this and look at financing security locks for the restrooms?
I think that would be a good choice to go ahead and do that. And just in the clarification, it's the restrooms at the Veterans Park. So there wouldn't be any confusion that people would think we're funding at the community park or Vineyard Park or any other one.
So would we make a motion on this to go ahead and recommend to the town council to consider this issue and see if they could fund the security locks, programmable security locks for the public restrooms at the parks?
That'd be great.
Yeah, so let me just understand. I was a little confused by Vice Chair Shermang's comments. I think we're talking about locks on two current and one future. So 2 ultimately at Veterans Park and at Yountville Community Park, and 1 at Vineyard Park. Yeah. So we're talking about.
So right now we have 3 current restroom doors at Yountville Community Park. So 2 on the lower, 1 on the upper, right. And then it would be added to the new restroom and Vineyard Park. So that's what we're discussing right now. And then leaving Veterans Memorial Park open at this point.
And also adding the town hall restroom in as well.
I was going to ask about that. Thank you, Steve.
I think we should consider all of them being there, and then with the programming of the locks, then we can decide which ones we want to remain open and which ones we need to lock at specific times. I don't know if that makes any more financial sense or not, but I think we should look at that issue or have that issue brought forth.
So just to clarify, then you're saying you would recommend to install them at Veterans Park and incur that expense if we're not planning on locking them at this point? Is that?
It might make financial sense to buy the whole system at one time rather than doing this piecemeal, two separate issues. I don't know. I think we need to have, kind of look at that if it makes any sense.
Okay, staff, I'm sure can do that analysis before we recommend it to council.
It's gonna be a per doorknob price. You're not gonna get any better deal buying this. It's not a package deal. You're paying per door. So if we buy ones for restrooms that we're not currently planning on locking, then we'll just be spending $3,500. That won't be any more use than the current doorknob. So if at some point you all decide that you want to lock other additional restrooms, we can certainly talk about it at that time.
So we're only talking about the community park and the Vineyard Park and the town hall restroom park.
That's depending on your motion. That is what,
Yeah.
and I do think it's important that you include which part you're recommending as a commission that stays open at this point in time.
Yes. Okay, that good. Wendy, you had a question on that?
I think that's where the confusion was for me. It's, should we be in reverse? Should we decide, are we recommending that yes, we should close certain parks and then we would go then purchase locks? I guess I'm just trying to understand, like, are we agreeing that yes, certain parks should be closed at dusk and veterans would be open 24 hours? Is that what we're voting on?
No,
So
it's
you're
I
not,
just kind of skipped right ahead to buying the locks.
yeah, we're asking for a recommendation on really all of those things. So what parks, restrooms would be locked and add, asking staff to bring that forward to council to fund that project. And then when would they be locked is another conversation. So there's been discussion of dusk, there's been discussion of 10 p.m., there's been discussion of, based on the time of year. So I think that would be kind of point number 2 to discuss. So.
Yeah, the timing issue is when do we lock the actual program it to be locked? I think we need to first have the locks and recommend that we have that and set, okay, if we're going to have a blanket start at 10 o'clock where the locks interact and then adjust them accordingly. I think we can always adjust them at that point. I think the main issue is
We don't want to recommend buying a lock for a park that we're not planning on closing as of.
Yeah. The Veterans Park is not going to have a lock. I think the Vineyard Park and the community park and the town hall, the town hall restroom will have these locks. So
I don't think the town hall was under discussion, was it? It's not a
Steve
park.
had mentioned that, but it's not a park, so we would just implement that.
I mean, it serves a purpose. People park there, and we haven't had much, if any, problems with it. So,
well, then we're only talking about Vineyard Park and
Vineyard
the
Park.
community park. 6 locks, I think. You're 4.
It's 4.
4
So
for
there's
the
three
community park.
restrooms currently at Yountville Community Park, 3 restroom main doors, and 1 at Vineyard Park. So it's 4.
Okay, 4.
And Joe, that $1,000 or $10,000 is for 4, or do we have any adjustment?
it'll be much less. It's basically about $1,700 a lock, Commissioner Tencher. So you're at the $7,000 roughly.
Yep. Okay.
It's probably going to be a little bit less than that.
I'm just saying you will end up with 5. You will have 4 total at Yountville Community Park shortly.
Yeah.
And Vineyard Park will have 1 So it's a
But
minimum.
we can add the new bathroom one into the budget. So
Yeah,
the
that's, yeah,
project.
yeah, right.
Okay, so now we've gone through all this. We have a motion to recommend that the town council purchase security locks for the restrooms at the community park and the restrooms at the Vintage Park.
Vineyard Park. Yes.
Vineyard Park, sorry.
Is there a motion?
I'll go ahead and motion that we propose to the council that remote access or programmable security locks be purchased for the restrooms at Yountville Community Park and Vineyard Park.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. We finally got through all that. Tongue-tied here late at night.
You want to go ahead and I'll just take a quick roll call vote if that's okay.
Okay,
Commissioner Riker?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, Commissioner Means?
Yes, aye.
Commissioner Tencher?
Aye.
Vice Chair Shermaine?
Aye.
And Chair Marciniak?
aye.
Thank you. So do you want to have the discussion about timing or do you want to wait on that?
Let's talk about it.
I think we can.
We've come this far.
Go ahead.
I think it makes sense I'm definitely on Vineyard Park. Sunset makes perfect sense. At Yonkville Community Park, which is really the one most likely where the residents are going to be impacted, if we say that those cars that are parked up by the cemetery are restaurant workers and they can use the restrooms at their place of work before heading to their cars, then that park too makes sense to me, that it be, when the park's open, the restrooms are open. When the parks are closed, the restrooms are closed, with the exception of Veterans Park.
I think the one plus of advantage of using the terminology of sunset and not putting a time, because with the time changing, and I mean, I apologize, I keep getting up and down because where I'm sitting now and zooming the lights at night, it's a whole different than the daytime zooming. So the sunset, that just sunrise, however that would be, that would make, versus putting a time on it, because that would change seasonally throughout the year.
I also agree that it would be more consistent with the policy of the parks being open at that point. So it would be more consistent to keep the whole system at one point rather than setting up different time.
And we most likely just, thinking as a staff is we probably would add a buffer to that a little bit on the later end, just in case. It's not always dark at sunset, so giving people a little bit of a time. And then obviously during events, we would alter the schedule as well, like if we were to have a movie in the park or something. So
yeah, the power of programmable system.
Yeah. So my question is, how often would you then change the time? I mean, sunset changes every day. Would you be changing them monthly?
I'm going to advocate for that. I think we will have to kind of do a
seasonal,
an average seasonal
adjustment. But I think, that's worth noting because, we do have benefit of it stays lighter longer in the summer. So I think many people do enjoy that. But I do think our staff, we can work out kind of a schedule. The good news is all of that data is there, so we can kind of map it out. And obviously, if there is any community event in the park, we would know that through the event program and be able to program that. So my suggestion would be that you include that recommendation into the policy request that you're sending to the council.
Very good. So we have a motion to include setting the time for these to be, for the restrooms locks to be open is to coincide as best as possible with the town, with the sunset to sunrise to sunset. So, and it's starting at that point and seeing.
Okay.
So do you want to vote on that? Do you have a motion?
Do we have a motion to do that?
I'll go ahead and make a motion that we recommend to the council that the timing of the locks be consistent with the timing of the opening and closing of the parks themselves, which is sunrise to sunset, giving staff leeway for a buffer, which makes operational sense to them, and it's so allowing a buffer.
Do we have a second for that?
I can second that.
Okay.
So we'll do one more roll call vote. Commissioner Riker,
Aye.
Commissioner Means,
Aye.
Commissioner Tencher,
Aye.
Vice Chair Shermaine,
Aye.
and Chair Marciniak.
Aye.
Thank you so much. All righty.
Oh, thank you. I think we've gotten to
Thank
the
you.
end of the part, except for any commissioner comments and reports that any of the commissioners would like to present at this time.
No.
Wendy, do you have a comment? Okay. I just have two comments. I'd like to thank Samantha and her crew for allowing the playground at the community park to be open this week.
That was so not me, Paul.
Good usage, and it is good to have that. And the other small issue is we're still questioning about the bench at the end of Jefferson Street to.
Sure, I've had a lot of conversations with your wife, and I have let her know that with COVID and the other items that we have going on, that we're doing our best to get to everything, but that unfortunately has been a little bit down the list, and I hope that you understand that we're doing our best to get to everything, but we got a lot of stuff going on right now, Chair Marciniak. So it's in the works. We haven't forgotten you. I have had probably 4 or 5 conversations with your wife on the subject, and I hope you understand that we're working on it. But we're now cleaning restrooms every morning. We're down a staff member because we had a seasonal worker that didn't feel comfortable working in COVID, so he retired, and we haven't filled that spot because we're just trying to conserve the budget to the best we can because of the COVID economy. And there's just so many bodies and so many hours in the day, and we have to get to the things that make a difference in a lot of people's lives, and not to say that the bench isn't making a difference in lives, but we're trying to balance all of the stuff we have going on. So hopefully you understand that.
Oh, I do understand. It's just a gentle reminder that it still hasn't happened. So.
No, I talked with your wife a week ago, and I think I talked with you 2 weeks ago, and we're doing the best we can.
All right, thank you. That's all my comments that I have. Carol?
I just one thing quick, piggybacking on Joe, that thank you for mentioning the park opening up, Paul. I mean, that's great news to have the kids have a place to have an outlet. But also what Joe was saying, the fencing around the tennis and pickleball courts is all going on this week. The Hopper Creek close to our Rancho de Napa, going with the Oak Circle, all that's going on. I mean, there's quite a bit in the midst of everything. So kudos to you, all of you, the town staff.
They're working very hard, and it's difficult. So thank you very much for understanding.
And the after-school camp program, Samantha, you've got going on.
Yep, we're keeping it rolling.
You're doing a great job. Thank you all. Now I guess we'll come to
Alan, did you want to say something?
If I may, just to hear a little bit more what Joe and his staff are experiencing with the installation of the acoustic fence. I did get Samantha's email update on that, but just it's always interesting to me to understand, you know, how that process is working for you and what you're thinking about as that goes in. It sounds like you're learning a lot about the installation as you take on the project.
Yeah, it's not as easy as it looks in the YouTube video. Let's just put it that way. You know, we want to make sure we get it right, and those things are heavy, and they're not. It's kind of like trying to fight a mattress. If any of you have moved a mattress, you know, you just can't grab it, and it's not solid, and it kind of flops around, and you can only get a couple of people in that lift, and so we want to make sure that we're getting it plumb and even, because it'll just kind of continue to be less plumb and less even as you get further down the line. So taking a little bit of time to get that first panel or two up and just learn the process, and we're just trying to get it right and make sure that what we're installing is going to stay there and look good for a long time, and that we're not damaging the mat as we're installing it, and we're trying to recognize that people still want to use the courts, so we're trying to move the mats around so that people can still use the courts. And I don't think it's going to be a 3-day install like they said in the video, but it will be done hopefully sooner rather than later, and we'll be benefiting for a long time to come.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for accommodating players, and thank you for all your efforts to mitigate this issue that was troubling the neighbors.
Sure. Yeah, I'll pass that along to the staff. They'll be happy to hear that. Thank you so much.
Can I just tell you one thing with the playground? So I would love to take all the credit for that, but part of it is the governor's reopening plan. And so the county public health director allowed Napa County playgrounds to reopen, and our staff you know, got right out there, and thank you to them, our public works staff, because after being closed for so long, it took quite a bit of cleanup, and then that cleanup got ashed on. So, you know, there's a lot going on out there, but we got our playgrounds reopened, and I know we have very excited groups that are coming to use them. So
You'll have a lot of happy children running around in there.
yeah, so really, yeah. The only thing that's remains closed at this point is the volleyball court, and that was due to multiple complaints to the county COVID line. So we did close those down for that. But everything else at this point is open with social distancing and mask recommendations and hand sanitizer and all those kinds of things.
Great. Thanks, everybody. So now, can we have a motion to adjourn the meeting? This has been pretty eventful. And Dave?
I motion that we move forward to adjourn this meeting until our next meeting in November.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second that.
All right, Carol. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Thank you all very much for your time.
And thank
Thank you,
you. I
Tim.
appreciate this.
Right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.